Alright, we're back with the server. Today we're doing a lecture on consequent encroachment. This is a very important concept, so this is going to be the start of the PD array playlist. So we're just going to be talking about PD arrays, all of that, and I thought there's nothing better to start with than consequent encroachment. So this is a very important concept because this will get us the most precise entry when entering off a PD array, and it's a very good spot for reversals as well. So to get in and explain what is the consequent encroachment, what is a 50% of any PD array. So the 50% of any fair value gap, order block, suspension block, any of that, the 50% is the consequent encroachment. And it's important because we can use it as a reversal point or a sniper entry, and it can help us frame a higher time frame narrative as well. And there are many concepts that are used with consequent encroachment as well, so it's super important to learn. So here I drew out a fair value gap, and this is an example of what consequent encroachment would look like. I'm gonna show my settings real quick. To get the middle line, you just click here and click middle line so that you get this line in the middle right here. And that is where consequent encroachment is for this fair value gap. So what could we use the consequent encroachment for? Well, again, if we're going to enter off this fair value gap, instead of entering longs like right here, instead, you can move your entry down to the 50% of this gap, and you can see the RR just immediately gets way better. So it's very good for entries, and also just a higher time frame narrative as well. If we have, let's say, this is a 15-minute or 1 hour gap, we could expect it to trade down to maybe the consequent encroachment and then get a reversal. So like we learned, maybe like an AMD manipulation into the consequent encroachment of a fair value gap, or a market maker buy model, market maker sell model, whatever. So it's a great point for price to manipulate in and reject off of. So now we're going to go over some chart examples and show you how effective the consequent encroachment is. Alright, so right here we have a good example. So as you guys see, we have this 5-minute gap right here. So it's a fair value gap. And I marked out the rectangle and you see the middle line. That is our consequent encroachment. So if we wanted to enter like a long, instead of entering at the beginning of the fair value gap, we could have just moved our entry down here. As you can see, we got a perfect entry. And you could target wherever you want to, like, I don't know, any other highs or whatever. And then it would have been a way better entry to enter at the 50% of this fair value gap instead of at the top. So it always happens. This is just one example. So let's find another one. And it's also fractal, so it works. What fractal means is it works on any time frame, so even on the 1 minute. So let's say like this 1 minute gap right here, we have a fair value gap right here. This one didn't quite tag into the consequent encroachment, so we'll move on to another example. Okay, so here is actually a really good example. So even for like inverse fair value gaps, if you guys know what that is. So right here, as you guys can see, we wick right to the 50% and then reject immediately. So instead of having your entry here at the beginning of that gap, you could have had it down here. And you can see you got way better risk to reward. And then you can target wherever you want to, and then boom. This is literally a perfect bottom tick. So let's go on a higher time frame to find some examples. Alright, so right here is a good example. So we're on a higher time frame. So here we have this 15-minute bearish fair value gap. And as you can see, we perfectly tag into that 50% of that fair value gap. And that gives us a way better entry. And you could have also been on a lower time frame and considered that like a manipulation. So like we manipulate up to the consequent encroachment of a fair value gap and then continue lower. So you could have probably gotten a better entry on the lower time frame, but it could have been like this. Like your stop would have been up here. You enter off some low time frame fair value gap along the way. So like right here, right here. And see, that gives you good RR. So those are ways that you can use consequent encroachment for like reversals and entries. But there's one more thing that I love consequent encroachment for, and that is being able to identify the probability of PD array failing or holding up. So what I mean by that is, okay, let me find an example real quick. Actually a really good example, I think. So right here, you guys see we have this 15-minute gap. So ideally, remember what we said, we could use a consequent encroachment as a very precise entry. But you can see this setup completely failed. We completely disrespect that gap. And there's actually a way where you can kind of anticipate this fair value gap to fail. And the way is a closure below the consequent encroachment. So if you guys see right here, before inversing this gap, we closed below the 50% of a fair value gap. And ideally, we want to see a rejection of that 50%. So if we close below it, that's a very bad sign that that gap is not going to hold up, or any PD array at all. So right here, we get a closure below. So after we get that, you could have maybe said, okay, I don't really want to stay in this trade any longer. Maybe we can look to get out of it. And as you can see, we fail right there. So let me find another example of this happening. So right here, I think it happens again. Yeah, so we have this gap. And as you can see, we trade into it. And what could we anticipate when trading into a gap? Well, we want to see a rejection off the consequent encroachment. It is the strongest reversal point of any PD array. So right here, as you see, we close right below the consequent encroachment. So we can kind of anticipate this gap to fail. So we do come back up initially, and then we go right back down, and then disrespect that gap fully. And again, it's fractal, works on any time frame. So even if you're on the 1 minute and you're entering off the consequent encroachment, so like right here, well, this one does get a closure, but that's why I feel like it's stronger on a higher time frame rather than a 1 minute gap, because 1 minute, especially during New York, way more volatile. So this gap could have gone to closure, but the trade idea could have still been right. But it works on any time frame. If we do get a closure below the consequent encroachment, you could anticipate a reversal. And if you want a sniper entry, more precise entry rather than entering at the top of the fair value gap, you could enter at the consequent encroachment. Of course, it's a little bit more like you do have to know when to use the consequent encroachment versus the top of the fair or bottom of the fair value gap. But if you know when to use them, then it could be very powerful. If it's a bigger gap, then it's better to enter off of maybe the top of it. But if it's a smaller gap, the consequent encroachment would be a much better entry. Because at the top of the gap, we could have more, it's like more likely for us to just reject right here. But, you know, this is a great example. This gap is pretty small, so it would be pretty smart to enter off the consequent encroachment if we were looking for an entry. So that's about it with this lecture. There's not much else to say. Just reviewing the main points is 50% of a PD array is a very good reversal point. You know, you could, on the higher time frame, you could align it with a low, also known as engineered liquidity, which we talked about in another video. And then on a lower time frame, it is very good for entries. So like a 1 minute fair value gap, you could enter off the consequent encroachment. Of course, like you kind of have to know when is the right time to use it. So if it's a smaller gap, you can use the consequent encroachment. If it's a bigger gap, then I don't really recommend it. And you can also use it on the higher time frame as sort of building your narrative for the day. So where we could possibly manipulate into, or where we could reject off of and start looking for an entry. So that's about it, and that wraps it up for this lecture.